Hello everyone. Welcome to Designing the New Usual, live and direct from Copenhagen in Denmark. We realise we're a little bit late starting, but we're glad that you are with us still. This is an event series about aiming to inspire businesses to walk the talk on sustainable practices, brought to you by the good people at the Index Project and Design It. Change is happening and the usual doesn't cut it anymore. This series has the aim of using design principles and ideas to reassess our way of thinking. Listening to people who've been in the game for a while, and we thought it would be a great starting point for you to be able to find your own way too. Everyone has a different way of doing things and acting on things, and we love that and we want to encourage that. So think of this as a universe shaped for and by you. In fact, it can only happen with you. And just because this is the first event of that whole universe that I talked about, it'll run for at least 10 months, this universe, with online articles, sum-ups, clubhouse events, and events like these as well. There's 4 overarching themes: sustainability, diversity, life-centered design, and what we're going to talk about today, which is leadership. And in particular, nurturing and sustaining leadership, and great leadership, if you like. Us at the Index Project and Design It, we're organisations that are working with leaders past, present and future, with the challenges that they come across, applying design to that, listening to them, seeing what can be done. And so it's maybe kind of poses the question, how do you become a great leader? It's kind of a big question in business management and in business in general. On top of that, you could say our workforce is changing and the workplace is changing as well. Not only with a pandemic turning everything upside down, but also with a millennial workforce entering the job market. We could argue already entered the job market. I think there's a need for progress, we can all agree. And that comes with challenges of its own. So what can we do? Well, to help us navigate these rocky waters of leadership, we've invited 4 leaders here to share what they know, what they've learned, and discuss with us what meaningful leadership is to them, what it looks like. So welcome, Pia Huusfelt, business leader global at Ingka Group, IKEA. Pia is all about inspiring, guiding, and leading teams through a clear vision, strategy, and follow-up. Then we have Henriette, Divert-Hendricks, executive advisor at BCC. Henriette helps companies close the gap between what they do and what they actually would like to do. And Jesper Ambrosius is here as well, director and head of Lego Workplace Experience. Jesper works with creating workplace experiences for Lego employees to be and do their best at work and to attract talent to work for Lego. And a little bit later on, we'll be featuring an interview we did with leadership strategist Ann Hiatt. Ann's been a leader at Amazon and Google alongside their leaders, and that will be all about future-proofing strategies and how to thrive under pressure. So what's going to happen over the next just under hour and a half? Well, coming up first, we have Jesper sharing some of his leadership ideals in a keynote. And later on, we'll feature the interview with Ann, which I've just mentioned. That's on future-proofing leadership. Staying with us throughout, I'm happy to say, Pia, Henriette and Jesper, sharing their thoughts and insights as well. And there'll be some time for questions for you as well, because we want to hear from you. We want to hear what's on your mind regarding leadership as well, just before we wrap up. Those of you tuning in, as I say, we want to hear from you. And just as I said, there'll be time to answer your questions. We really want to hear them later in the event. So please get sharing what comes to mind in terms of leadership. What comes to your mind there? We'd love to know. What challenges are you facing, or what are you missing? Please tell us. You can enter your comments in the YouTube field, or you can just send it to us by paper plane or pigeon or aeroplane or whatever you want to send it. Please send your comments in. We'd love to get them. So, without further ado, let's get going. Starting with Jesper and how to lead in a hybrid world. Coming up straight after this.
Thanks so much, Phil. Hello, everyone. My name is Jesper Ambrosius, and I work for the LEGO Group and head up what we call LEGO Workplace Experience. And today, I will talk to you about leading in a hybrid workplace. So, working remotely or working from home is not a new thing. Many of us have done it for years, but it's quite clear that COVID-19 accelerated an already evolving process. And the question, of course, is when people are dispersed more and when people work more from home, and maybe every meeting will be an online meeting, as Chris Top wrote on a LinkedIn article more than a month ago, how does that affect leadership? So that's really what I'll dive into today. And just what Chris was really writing about in the article was if we randomly come into the office, then just gathering 5 or 6 people will be very, very difficult. And also, in that sense, the minority rule counts here, because if just one person is online, everybody should preferably be online. So I believe that leaders should at least focus on 4 things in a hybrid workplace. And I write here at least because there's definitely more, but these are just what I found interesting in the field that I'm in of workplace experiences. So the number 1 is focus on output, not input. The second one is plan ahead. The third one is master the digital room. And the fourth one is what I call communicate triad of interest. Right, so let's go to the first one here. I believe that with people working more remotely, not being physically together, there's a risk of a declining trust. And what I mean by this is that it's still out there. Definitely experienced it myself. I have colleagues in other companies experience them as well, that if you unobserved, people will tend to slack, right? So if we cannot see what you're doing, you're maybe slacking. And when you simply do not have that metric or proxy of input of hours spent behind the screen equals output, then something else has to happen. So what I believe we must do as leaders, and it's actually something we should have been doing for a while, at least in the knowledge sector, is to be better at defining end goal and then invite for continuous feedback. So instead of observing that one person is sitting 10 hours behind the screen, another is sitting 9 hours, but then the person sitting 10 hours is more productive, we should instead be better as leaders to define the task, the end goal, and then invite for continuous feedback. That actually also will then, you could say, benefit or reward those who are extra fast or extra talented, because they will actually then get time back for their work-life balance if they do their task quickly. The other area here is what I call plan ahead, and there's really 2 areas, and I'll go through a few examples from LEGO actually that we have created in my team to highlight what I'm saying here. The one thing is plan according to activity, and the other thing is really plan with your team. So let me just showcase what I mean here. Oh, yeah. Right, so our hypothesis is actually that working from home or working remotely is not in direct competition with working from the office. Actually, we believe it complements each other. And this is highlighted here where on the y-axis you have collaborative and individual, and on the x-axis you have the office or working from home. And here you can see that what we've mapped out here is actually not just it's an assumption. It's also something that we've actually tested out at LEGO and asked people about. So this is actually based on survey as well. And here you can see that working with more focused work, doing e-learning, town halls, quick coordination meetings might actually be better suited for working from home or remotely, whereas workshops, strategy meetings, walk and talks, informal meetings, it's much better suited still in the physical workplace where you are together. And here, let's look at Albert. and how we could look like for someone who works in a hybrid workplace. So here you can see on Monday, Albert comes in. He does some focus work in the office. Then later he does some collaboration work. It's a bit the same on Tuesday, also coming to the office. On Wednesday he then works from home. It's more focused work for Albert, and he goes then back to the office on Thursday. Again, a lot of it is with colleagues. It's mostly with colleagues when he's in. And then on Friday, again, he works from home and does more of the coordination and the focused work that is better suited for, in most cases, is better suited for home. And if we then look at two teams here, and I'll come back to why I think this is so important to look at the individual, but also the team, is to see that here you can see that it's team 1 and team 2. So team 1 have agreed to come in Tuesday and Wednesday, and team 2 has decided to come in on Monday and Thursday. Of course, both teams are with the same company, and here you can actually see that not only do they plan so they are physically together on the same days, so they kind of get the maximum benefit of being in the office, but it's also much better for capacity and occupancy if you do it like this, instead of if people came in at random, as Chris Tubb is referring to in his article on LinkedIn. And what's interesting here is actually also, the office that is still adds a lot of value by really making space for social capital to thrive. And there's an Harvard Business Review article from a month or so ago with some scientists from Microsoft who looked through a lot of the data they've created last year or so. And one of their conclusions, I think the most interesting conclusion, is that the spontaneous, informal interactions at risk in a hybrid and remote work are not distractions or unproductive. They foster the employee connections that feed productivity and innovation. And these interactions are the soil in which ideas grow. And that's why it's so important, I believe, that what might seem unproductive in the very short term might be the most productive in the long term. So the third area here is master the digital room. So a lot of the things that you would do in a normal face-to-face meeting is also the same thing you should do in an online meeting. So you should still prepare, you still explain why we're having the meeting, what are the roles, who have the different roles in the meeting. You should engage the participants and so on and so forth. But there are especially 3 areas I believe is very important in an online setting. One of them is agree on the housekeeping rule. So that is, for instance, do we have camera on? Depends on the intensity of the meeting, probably. You raise your hand if you have a question or if you have a comment. Make sure to mute when you're only listening, and so on and so forth. That's important too, because it's not natural for us necessarily to be in that setting. The other thing is really engaging participants, and that's about also doing lots of micro engagement, so to say. You can use polls, you can use quizzes, you can use energizers. I'll give you an example in a bit on that. Because what has also been what is seen and what has been seen by research, what we see is that a lot of people do work related and non-work related stuff whilst being in online meetings. So it's important to constantly engage the participants. And as one example, we have in my team, if we have a meeting that is at least an hour long, we always start the meeting with an energizer, and I'll give you an example on that in just a bit. And the final part is really to manage energy. And what I mean by that is that we can probably at maximum keep 20 minutes of attention. So it's important to have a lot of variance in the way we run meetings. So whether that's separating the meeting into different groups, you go out, you come back into plenum discussions, or you maybe engage via the chat box or whatever, is important to get the variance in, because we have so many meetings and there's a risk with more meetings. That's also what most can see, that in a hybrid workplace or with people working remotely with more online meetings, there's risk of mental exhaustion, there's risk of too many meetings, and it's just difficult for people to manage the energy. And this is just an example of what we've created this Lego playoffs handbook, a handbook of energizers in our team. And we then use that every time we have a meeting in the team. And we've actually right now trying to also engage other teams in Lego to do the same. So hopefully we can kind of propel a trend there. And then finally, what I describe as a triad of interest. And what I mean by that is really that for leaders, I believe, to really, you say, it's a huge change process we're in, and for leaders to come out good, in this change process, I think we need to understand and communicate the three different interests in this. There's the I, or the me. So that is basically my needs, my flexibility, my ability to actually plan my week, my month, my work day. Then there's also the team, and the I also has to adapt to the team. So my team also has to adapt to whatever I find is important to create a good team bond, to create a good team spirit, and to actually develop as a team. So so that's where there's a potential conflict there, but there's two potentially different needs in some cases. And then there's also the third entity here, which is a company, and the company also has some needs, like building a culture, just sustaining the culture, like developing leaders, like onboarding people, the social fabric of the whole company. For a company like Lego, which has been around for almost 90 years, the history and the values are so crucial. And of course, the company, represented by executive leadership team and the board, they want to maintain this, of course. So these three entities have to allow, we have to understand each other. So it's not, so when I ask you to come in with the rest of your team on Wednesday, it's not because I don't trust you, it's because I want to build the team. And the same when the company sets out a, so to say, a guideline or a concept for how to work going forward. At Lego, for instance, we have a 3-2 model that we communicated just recently. That's not because the company does not trust the employee. It's really because it has some needs that it's also important to fulfill. Otherwise, I think we run the risk of this tug of war between the entities, and so explaining that to your employees, and constantly refer back to the different needs, I believe will be a hugely important change management task, but something we must overcome in this new world. So that was it. So thanks a lot, everybody. And back to
Thanks very much, Jesper. Appreciate that. I love this analogy of the tug of war. It's I've definitely felt it myself. Lots to unpack there. So now it's a chance to dive in with into what great leadership actually is with our panel. Pia, Henriette, Jesper, all here. Jesper, you mentioned about leaders having to engage or look at how they're going to engage more. I guess there's a traditional image, probably a very old, stuffy image of how leaders are somehow detached from the day-to-day workings of life, and they're making tough decisions on behalf of the workplace themselves. But actually, leaders are people as well. We've seen that in the pandemic more than ever. We've kind of had these layers stripped bare, so they appear in all walks of life, in different ways, different paths as well. I'm really interested to kick off a nice discussion. Pia, you're closest to me, so I'm going to go with you. What are the qualities that make for a good leader?
Yeah, with unfortunately 25-30 years of experience, I must say, there are some things that stick to me still, which is super important. And it's small things like how do you secure an environment where people feel that they are being seen? So how am I being seen? And create a trust environment and transparency. So communicate clearly and really be close to the values and yourself, and authentically just share vulnerability as well and things like that. So the more human you can be, I have learned, the stronger you are as a leader. And I think many times it's perceived as weakness, but for me it's really the opposite. And also I lead a agile team, which is where we have 3-week sprints we work in, and I'm actually only setting the goals for these 3 weeks. And then I just leave the team. I have nothing to do with it anymore. Then I see them demo after 3 weeks, the fantastic work they have done, and so happy showing me what they have done, and also other stakeholders, by the way. And then another 3 weeks. So I only set the goals and the priorities, and then they're self-managing. And what I have learned from more traditional leadership, where I think still trust communication and all that is still important also now, but that is that people actually, when you trust them, they give you so much back. And then they really put themselves in front, and then they, between them, find a way. Who's best for this? Who has energy in this? Who is up for it for this period? Who would like to learn something now? And then it suddenly become an organic thing. I have never ever led a team like I do now that have had so much output and quality by actually putting myself a little behind, but putting some rules up and some clear communication and so on. But it's amazing. So what I'm trying to say is that we have so many resources as humans, and if you can unleash that, I think then you have the quality in your leadership.
I can see Henriette nodding away. So do you agree? Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, I think there's so many good points in what you're saying, Pierre, so I definitely agree. I think if I was to, I think definitely the way that you're describing freedom and the ability to act, that's what you need to create as a leader. If I was to sort of say it off the tongue, I would say as a leader I think you need to create the ability of an organization to create results and work with relationships. That's the two main focuses of leaders. But I'm more humble around saying what is good and what is bad, because I think it's extremely context driven. And I mostly collaborate with leaders who are in their 50s and they've been successful forever. So I'm not trying to basically change what they're doing, because they are all imperfect and doing it in exactly their way. But what I'm trying to teach them is how to become aware of what they're doing. So basically, I think when you describe your way of leading, Pia, I think what's the quality around you is that you have a self-awareness on a high level. I think that's the difference. So you can be a leader in many different shapes and forms, just like you said, Phil, but the self-awareness piece is actually the most important element. You have to be, I normally popularly say, you have to be a little bit schizophrenic as a leader. You have to act, and while you're acting, you have to sort of be able to stand next to yourself and look at what you're doing. And that's actually becoming increasingly important as I see it, because the difference with the millennials, as you started out, Phil, is that I think I also feel it as a parent actually. There's an increase in the request from young people on, especially people with more authority, having this self-insight and the self-awareness and the self-irony and being able to sort of, put yourself a little bit in parentheses and not be so authoritarian, classically authoritarian. So that's happening right now. That's what I see the most. So results and relationships, and then the self-awareness, that's what I would go for.
It sounds exhausting in a way, to be a leader, like to work on this schizophrenic level, as you call it.
No, you could also say it's more relaxing, Phil, because it gives you the right to step next to yourself and say, that didn't come out right, help me here. Because I think another important shift that's going on right now, so I've been working with leadership for more than 20 years, most of the time as an advisor, but also as a leader. And I would say one of the shifts going on right now is during the 20 years, I think we've over-focused on the individual. Leadership is a relationship, right? So I think we should focus on the relationship rather than the individual. And that actually gives you a little bit more, as a leader, you don't have to be as perfect anymore, right? Because it's in the relationship. We have to, there's a two-way street in leading, right? And the good thing is most of us have really, really good colleagues, really good people that we are leading. So it's not that hard.
No, it's a very good point. It's about relations instead of individuals. That was actually a good way of saying it, because that's exactly also what I experience, and that collectively you do more, or at least you have the opportunity to create more. than individually. So that we know. So I think that was actually a quite good way of saying it. So that's what happens. So the dynamics between people somehow influence how things will turn out instead of being individuals. So that was just a very good.
Could you actually argue then that and I fully agree with that, by the way, that relationship and relationship building is so important for a leader, that time is kind of like the currency of relationship as well. I mean, that's all the way also from the Little Prince and the story about it. Time is really essence here. Could you argue then that, at least from where I sit, not only private companies but also actually public companies are making more and more, especially organizational changes, at a quicker and quicker pace, where you have to relate to new people all the time? Could you say there's almost like an enemy for the relationship building, and could that actually be something that we should worry about? My own answer would be yes. I think there is too much change because where you kind of like it's an easy change to change the organization. It always looks good on paper, by the way. You can always argue why it's a good idea, right? So and I just worry that with the relationship building and that being so important, which I fully also believe in and support. So maybe that's for later. But I do think that there's something about the organization and building that can be tricky if there are constant changes.
I totally agree, Jesper. And I think it's, if you are the kind of, I mostly work with the executive suite, right? So if you are the type of executive who needs to use organizational change, an organizational structure change as your only, tool for changing the organization, then you are not a very competent manager, right? I mean, we all know that the organizations are basically, global networks of people who want to be connected, who actually belong to the family of Lego, right? That's how we all identify, and that's why I think that we should really respect relationships. And actually, in your opening, Jesper, my worry, my most sort of, fierce worry right now is actually not the team in itself, because I think during COVID we've had all these weird conversations from our bedrooms and with the dogs and the kids and all this stuff. I'm worrying about the social relationships between the teams, all the cross-organizational stuff, all the flirting at the Christmas party and all the relationships, because at the end of the day, organizations are human, organisms where we are all connected. And social obligation is basically the only obligation that makes you stand up at 4:30 and do the last part of the presentation or whatever you do, right? You're obligated towards somebody. And that's my worry. How do we make sure that on the days where you're at the office, you can actually talk to those other guys from the other teams and stuff like that?
Exactly.
Because that's hard.
No, you're right. And I think online meetings in particular they're very purpose-driven, right? So you go into this meeting with a particular purpose. And I actually realized after a few months last year that I probably had expected my team to actually mingle around in the meeting, so they would create their own hangout meetings on Friday afternoon or whatever. That happened for a few, but it actually didn't happen for most of them. So I actually had to take the facilitator role, and I had to organize it, which would never happen in the real world. So again, I think that's something to be aware of, that not everybody will just normally, reach out to people and create those different relationships online.
Definitely not. And I think we're talking about the wrong things, right? If we were in a physical workplace, we would talk much more about each other, right? We would say, good to see you, Phil. Oh, I haven't seen you forever, Pia. How's your mom doing? And that the whole personal layer of conversation is just not there right now. And we are, I would argue that, so I've had a few teams that have actually, just like you, Jesper, organized, Thursday evening, informal drinks and then they've actually, they've sent out questions like, what was the most awkward or embarrassing thing you did when you were a teenager? What was the blah blah? Personal questions that are okay to answer, but are really goddamn awkward, right? Where you get to know each other, and that has worked. But you have to structure it. It's not like when you sit over lunch and you actually ask those weird questions. So those informal conversations that build relationships.
We have done a lot of these things. We have gaming on Fridays, we have check-ins on Tuesdays, and so we do a lot. And I think we have actually, I'm super proud of what has happened from that. And we all feel in the team that we are closer, as you also say. So we are actually much closer than in the real world, you can say. That is a little interesting, right? But then the question is, as what you're onto, I think, or you as well, the concern about stakeholders or the rest of the organization. So we have become even closer. And I'm super afraid, to come back to your years, but that we are then this little united when we are
creating us and them culture, right?
And then, so how do you suddenly engage with the rest of your colleagues that are super important for the big results at the end? Because we cannot keep on doing that, but we have actually turned into that. So it is a little, it's a new. It's a new things we had never thought about before.
And there's something about being out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, exactly.
And therefore, if you, how would you meet someone who you hadn't thought about because you hadn't seen him or her? So, but you randomly dump into that person in the office, someone from a different department, right? And then that happens. That just doesn't happen online.
No.
And so there's something interesting there.
Just very quickly before we go to Ann Hiatt, I'd love to know. It sounds like the style of your leadership is constantly evolving. And you're discovering stuff now that wasn't in place then. And if we hadn't had the pandemic, you'd have discovered something else. How do you keep up with that evolution?
I'm not so sure. It's I partly agree and partly disagree with the assumption. A lot of the things that we need now, we also need that 20 years ago. Some of the things are just being accentuated now.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So the level of how you make sure that you show even clearer that you trust people. Right. Make it do even more of the you could say the non-planned interactions with your people. Make sure that everybody is included and engaged in a meeting, right? Everybody is now much more, especially in online meetings, much more, at the same level. No matter who you are, if the CEO, or you'll still be a picture on the screen. So I think and that we should also strive for in the real world, to include everybody, the inclusion in the meetings. So nothing has changed in that respect. It's just being much more clearer now what needs to happen. So I actually do think it's to a large extent it's the same principles, and it goes back to what you said. I mean, I think it worked 25 years ago. It still works. It's just a different setting, and I think the real challenge is making it work in a different setting. So how do you create relations online? But it's still about creating relations, as an example. So I actually do think that's.
Now the big question: how do we then come back in normal? I mean, we have.
And we don't, right?
No, we don't. We don't. No one wants to be normal. No, exactly. So for instance, we have learned that nature should be part of the future, because that's one of the things we have learned, that we have much better meetings when we walk.
When we're outdoors.
When we're outdoors, when you're free, you only have people in your head and no notifications. You're just present. You are with your colleague or your manager or whoever. So how can that be brought in? So it's super interesting that that transition would be as awkward as it. I mean,
true. Yeah.
We have to unlearn again and then learn something new.
No, definitely. Just imagine you suggested that.
Super. So to your question, it's exhausting in that sense. It keeps on evolving, and then but we adapt, and it's just I don't think it's.
That's great. Well, we're going to pause our thoughts there for the moment. And it's actually very related, because, of course, we're talking about this turmoil that we've gone through in some ways, whether it was present or not in different ways before. I totally take your point, Jesper. But that's exactly what Ann Hiatt also covers. So thanks to all of you. We'll be back for more really soon. But now's a chance to hear from Ann. Ann Hiatt is a Silicon Valley veteran with 15 plus years experience at two of the biggest and most well-known, you could argue, companies in the world, Google and Amazon. And it's also given her access to the leaders of those companies. You may have heard of them and their styles of leadership at the time as well. She's had to ride the dot-com bust in the early noughties or 2000s, the financial crisis around 2008, and setting up her own business as well during this pandemic, which of course hasn't gone away. It's fair to say that Ann has a thing or two to share about the best practices of surviving and thriving during a crisis. She has a podcast of her own as well, Bet on Yourself, and a book later on its way later on this year. So we caught up with Ann a few days ago, starting with a look at her career and how it all began. Check this out. I'd just like to throw this at you. You say of your time at the beginning of your career, I was very young. It was very intimidating, but I knew that was never going to happen again. The internet was never going to be invented again. E-commerce was never going to be invented again. And I wanted a seat in that room. Working for leaders, I wanted to become like. Ann Hiatt, welcome. It's safe to say you did become a leader in your own right, and now you're passing it on, helping others realize their potential as well. What goes through your mind when you hear someone read back to you all your achievements?
I don't feel as fancy as that all sounded. I really don't. It was. Thank you for that overly generous introduction and welcome. It has been quite a ride. I feel supremely privileged to have been in those rooms and witnessed those moments that will never happen again. And I'm thrilled that I can share a bit of what I've learned on the other side of it all with everybody today.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you came to focus on this idea of improving leadership.
My entire career, I've been surrounded by some of the best leaders in the world and witnesses both their best practices and also, equally important, a lot of their mistakes. And so I think the lessons learned through that experience really drives me in my new career post-Google, in consulting with CEOs around the world, and also in speeches, putting together the podcast, the book, are all similarly motivated. I feel like I had this unprecedented elite education sitting at their sides for those 18-hour days for the last 2 decades. And I feel really firmly about democratizing the internet. We need more voices, more diverse perspectives, more companies outside of Silicon Valley. We need more representation. I think if we learned anything in 2020, it was that we needed more leaders in the world, not fewer. We need people to actually take some ownership over these really important voices and causes and issues that have been brought up for us.
Now, anyone who either knows you, knows your business, caught one of your talks, like the South by Southwest one, they might be familiar with this idea that you've modeled and invented yourself around personal ROI. Recognize it, own it, implement it. I'm not going to steal your thunder. I would love you to be able to expand on that and pack it for anybody who hasn't come across it.
Sure. I'm really excited to share this because it's a big principle in my upcoming book. And I put together this ROI. The traditional definition, of course, is return on investment, which absolutely applies. But my spin on it is for the R is to really recognize. And that's about how you're defining success for yourself. I think being future-proof is making sure that that definition comes from yourself and not external pressures or expectations of your family or your culture, your industry, your gender, whatever it might be. So really defining for yourself what success means to you and taking some ownership over that. So that's asking yourself to hone in on really what you want to do, what you want to contribute into this world, and I think equally important, who you want to do it with. It's the quality of people around you really set you up for delivering something really unique for yourself. I think it's also an important part of what I call engineering serendipity, which we might get into a little bit more. For me, engineering serendipity is about knowing what you want so that you recognize opportunities in their infancy, maybe a little grain of an idea or an opening in a door. You know where you're going, so you recognize it when it crosses your path and it otherwise might have just passed you by and you might have missed it. So that about recognizing is knowing what you're looking for and what you're seeking out. The O is about owning it. This is about reinvesting and reinventing yourself over and over again across your career. I absolutely have done that. I find I go in about 3-year cycles on this, which is an interesting pattern to recognize in retrospect. So this is about crafting some really big dreams, believing in yourself, in your uniqueness, leaning into that where you have a diversity of experience or thought, and reinvesting in your skills consistently, up-leveling, learning new things, remaining curious, and not considering your comfort zone actually your comfort zone, recognizing that that's actually pretty dangerous and you want to live on the edge of that comfort zone and consistently push yourself out of that. I think a third element of owning it is consistently investing in your network. Again, this goes back to the people you're surrounding yourself with and making sure they're people who keep you curious help you question your own status quo, give diversity of thought and opinions, and really taking some advantages of pivot moments, which we're all in right now, using that to our advantage instead of disadvantage, and working towards our end goals and seeking constant improvement. And that leads us to the last step, which is implement, which is really that endless cycle of putting in the hard work, pivoting, taking in those successes or those failures. I don't even use the word failure really, because it's all just learning, the learnings that we have as we go along and pivoting with that. And that's how we create an action plan. How are we going to take this concept of what we want to do and what we want to be, and how do we create something that's purposeful and proactive rather than being reactionary in our lives? And that's really how you turn your dreams into a reality of what you're doing today.
I'd like to step back then and kind of look into them a little bit further, if that's okay. Let's start with recognize. Of course, it makes sense to start at the start. What is it about good leaders? What do they recognize in themselves during these pivot moments?
Probably the most frequently asked question I receive is, tell me the common denominators between these great leaders you've worked with. What makes Jeff and Eric similar? What is this best practice I can adopt? And I think people are consistently surprised that my answer is humility and curiosity. You don't think of these larger than life celebrity CEOs as being defined by their humility, but that is 100%, in my opinion, the reason why they stay innovative and effective on their teams. So I think it's important to consistently look inside ourselves, see if there's opportunities where we could learn something new, we can stretch ourselves outside of our comfort zone, where we actively seek out feedback from our peers in our environment. And in that assessment, a self-assessment or that feedback you're getting from your team or your peers, really think about what strengths you need to develop. What are your greatest strengths and how can we maximize that in your work? Maybe also some things that are areas of weakness where you want to make sure you've hired really well and that you're delegating to people who have that as a strength. And I think in crafting that environment, that's how you really are an effective leader in these pivot moments. And because you've been proactive in preparing yourself and building up your strengths, rather than being caught on the back foot and being reactive to something unexpected happening in your industry.
There's something I caught in something you said earlier about reinvesting and reinventing ourselves over and over again, with a focus on sustaining leadership and sustainable leadership, if you like. I can imagine that some people will think that risk taking is contrary to that, and it will send you into an absolute tizzy. So, I mean, with risk not feeling so secure, how do you see that, and what's the benefits of taking a risk in great leadership?
I feel really strongly about this one, and I think people will recognize a moment as I describe it. What we've really been through in the last year with the 2020 pandemic has showed us that actually complacency is far more dangerous to us than calculated risk taking. If we were complacent, that's going back to that being on the back foot, being caught off balance, not being prepared to take proactive decisions. But if you are in a consistent habit of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, up-leveling your skills, disrupting your own status quo, if that will really lend itself to being an environment where you can be proactive. If you're not challenging your status quo or up-leveling, you're primed for either becoming irrelevant or disrupted. And I think that's what's happening right now. Most of my clients have come out of the pandemic on the other side better off than they were before, because they were prepared to take some risks. They had already been doing that data gathering. They've been watching their dashboards. They've been reinvesting in where they were getting good returns. And so now they come out the other side having fast forwarded their growth because they took some risks that they probably would have been too shy to take before and were forced to, but were prepared to handle that pivot. Because that was the culture of their companies and what they demanded of themselves.
You've spent a lot of your time focusing on leadership strategies as such. But what about this millennial workforce, where their expectation, their needs and wants, their demands even, slightly different than perhaps when we entered the job market? What should leaders consider in that respect for the millennials in the workforce?
I think that's such an important question for the future of our companies and careers, is knowing how to pair well with this generation that's just coming into the workforce in a really strange moment in time. I think millennials actually offer us a wonderful opportunity to recenter our work, our companies, and our contribution to the world on what we're most passionate about. All of my CEO clients, regardless of whether they're at $100 million valuation or if they're raising their Series A, all of their questions really come back to the conversations around what is your mission, what is your vision, and what are your values. And I think millennials are craving that, not only craving it, they're demanding that of the employers that they come. It really informs their spending as a consumer, and it absolutely informs their career choices. And I think that's a great opportunity for all of us to do the same. A lot of the complexities that come when you're scaling, when you're expanding, when you're pivoting, like we all are right now, all those conversations come back to what is your mission, vision, and values of the company, because the answers lie in that. If you haven't properly defined that for yourself, you're going to become really disoriented as you pivot. But if you have that well-defined North Star and something that's beyond just a slogan on the wall in our lobby, when we return to offices, beyond that, is it part of your conversations? Are your leaders, are your junior employees quoting that mission statement as they're trying to make really hard decisions? Is that something that's part of your vernacular? Is that the vocabulary your company uses? If not, it's not having the impact or the intended purpose of having a well-crafted mission statement. And I think millennials help us recenter on that.
I think that's so relevant to the times that we're in. We all have different lives, different backgrounds at the moment, and we're all dealing with the pandemic in a very different way. And while you're talking there, I just made a little note to myself as well, that as someone who works for a design company, and we're always looking at things that are design challenges, and this feels very much like a design challenge. Let's call on design now. There's something in there, and I'm really interested then in how yourself and other great leaders, how you deal with that complexity in those pivot moments. What goes through your mind, if anything?
So the basics for me, really the best practices I've seen across all my clients in the last year and a half has been, one, over communicate. You think you've said something, but actually research shows that people need to hear something 7 times before they really actually internalize it. So you might be like, I feel like a broken record, but no, really over communicate, especially in moments of pivot or change, making sure that people hear it, they feel supported, they've got psychological safety, not only communicating what we're going to do and what we're pivoting to, but show them the math. Show them what we're solving for and why this is the solution. Because if they understand how you created this equation for where we're going, they feel more sense of ownership and understanding of how they're going to interpret that through their work now. I think some leaders make the mistake of not communicating it enough and not communicating the why of the what they're asking them to do. So that's first. Second is, I mentioned earlier, making sure you have an open door policy. This is essential while we're still remote from each other, and as we're transitioning into kind of a hybrid model of coming back, but not being totally together as we were in the past. Having an open door policy is really important so that leadership feels more accessible and not less. A lot of my clients have had really good results doing something I call office hours, inspired by the university environment, where you have this lecture and you're up there and you're presenting to your company and you think, great, we all have the same plan. And then they go to do their homework, they go to do their job, and they're not quite sure how to interpret it. You want them to come to office hours so that not only your leadership team, your direct reports is coming to you, but any level of the company can come and ask a quick clarifying question. So maybe the junior most intern on your team has an opportunity through office hours to sign up for just literally a 30-second question. These moments we used to do around the water cooler. If you have a time on your calendar where they can just pop in for a quick question that they never would have been brave enough to go to your assistant and be like, because they don't need 30 minutes, they need a quick gut check. My CEOs who have adopted this have had amazing ideas come to them that they never would have been exposed to otherwise. And it really helped this junior level of their company feel aligned and valued by their leadership. So I recommend giving that a try. And then I think really doubling down on focusing on the culture. You might have onboarded some people you've never met in person. Maybe it was a Zoom hire. You maybe had to pivot the way you celebrate your big wins or the way that you internalize your culture. I think doubling down on that is essential right now so that people feel a sense of pride and identity around being part of what you're building. And maybe that's a very American perspective because we are naturally defined by our work. But I think celebrating the culture of what you're doing and why you're doing it helps everyone come together. And that's how you get that grit factor. That's another commonly asked question by my clients is, how do I keep people really gritty while we're kind of in this pandemic fatigue? And I think that alignment of culture and why we're here and why we're doing it is how you get that next level of grit while we're all waiting for the light at the end of this tunnel.
What do you mean by grit? What exactly do you mean by that?
Grit is a term coined by a behavioral psychologist, Angela Duckworth. She has a book by that same title, Grit. Highly recommend it. One of the most influential books I've ever read. But it's that factor of the people who go the extra mile. They're so committed and so value aligned that they anticipate needs. They do things before they're asked. They're very, very proactive. So these are ambitious, highly intelligent people who, given the right understanding of our North Star, are going to proactively take some steps to get there.
And talking about books, I mean, you have your podcast, which I recommend everybody go and listen to. I really love it. And then you've got your book coming out soon. I mean, it wouldn't be right of me not to ask you about your book a little bit. Just so, it's coming out later this year, and what can we expect to find in it?
It was delayed because of the pandemic. It was supposed to already be out, but we've pushed it to October. So it'll be available for pre-sale mid-June. And the publication date in the States is October 12th. It will be coming to Europe shortly after that. It's titled Bet on Yourself, as you mentioned, same name as my podcast. And it's really about how do you create opportunities for yourself, especially when options appear limited on the surface. So it's whether you're in that junior most position at the beginning of your career, or maybe you're mid-career and really wanting to be acknowledged as a leader, take on a new client, be recognized for promotion, get into that senior leadership category, or as a CEO yourself, how do you get this out of your employees and how do you demand that of yourself and continue to up-level and focus yourself not only on today, but looking at that long-term legacy that you're trying to build.
Hey, time's up, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Phil. I had so much fun. Next time in person, I hope.
I hope so too. Thanks to Ann Hiatt. We'll put the full interview up on YouTube straight after this event. So back to our lovely panel. Hello. Pia, Henriette, Jesper. I'd like to take a chat around some of the things that Ann touched on, and we'll have some time to answer your questions too, to everybody who's listening out there. I want to dive straight into this. Ann talks about leaders risk-taking, and risk, I mentioned it on the video as well, risk seems really scary to me. Maybe I'm just risk averse, but risk seems the last thing you want to do when the boat is rocking. So do you consider yourself risk takers? Maybe Henriette, you can
I
start.
certainly do. Maybe a little too much sometimes. I think what we've seen this year, as Anne alluded to also, is that we systematically underestimate the risk of not doing, right? So the risk of waiting might actually be higher than the risk of jumping, right? So I think one of the challenges that we see if we go to boards and executive team discussions is that there is often a tendency to saying we need more information. Let's make the decision next quarter. And that behavioral pattern that is basically not creating any value for anybody, but it is actually at the heart of risk averseness, which is there in some teams, that has shifted over 2020 because we've now seen that we have to make the decision now. And many of the decisions that we've seen and had to make over 2020 would not have become more certain had we waited or had we done more analysis. So I think I see teams, I don't know what your experiences are, but I see teams and individuals, leaning more forward, jumping more to decision making than has happened before. Maybe one challenge on that is, of course, when you are in a crisis mode, the number of more fundamental decisions that you have to make increases a lot, right? And that of course gives you more experience. So maybe that's why, I don't know.
And Pia, I saw you nodding during that as well. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think you put it very clear. So I don't have that much to add to that. I think that's the mechanism that has happened. And then it comes back to some of the more core values again about having a trust environment that benefit when you are in such a situation where you need to do that. That will help even further. So if you had that from the beginning. So these are good, basic values of having good values in your leadership. And then, as I mentioned, also the vulnerability, that you dare to show that you don't know the answers, which is part of also, that also increases others to daring to jump out of the box and have a crazy idea and then test it. If you yourself is also acting really like, I have no clue what to do now. Any good ideas? That you put yourself again out of the role as being the leader or the manager. It's a collective thing. We are on the same ground here, and no one has the answer. No one has the answer. So let's collectively find the answer, and then So it's to unleash that again. So yes.
And that's the best that has happened in 2020, right? Everybody was like. Clueless, right? Nobody had seen anything like that coming, and it just sobers you up, right? To know that you never, the largest thing that can happen, you can never predict, right? So actually, knowing that you have everything on the list, for now we know we don't have everything on the list. There will always be stuff happening.
So it's much better to probably be robust when it happens, because it will happen. So I think that's something that. But no, I completely agree. I think maybe a twist to that is also sometimes that leaders are expected to make decisions all the time, and non-decision is not seen as leadership. Sometimes, and I agree, by the way, that sometimes you can postpone too long because you're waiting for some data that will not show up, right? COVID is great example where you basically you're seeing a very small part of this the full distribution, and what we've just seen in the last 3 weeks. I think 3 or 4 weeks more people have died within the last 4 weeks than the rest of the period combined. So we're just seeing an extreme exponential growth. And so basically what we're seeing in the beginning is nothing. So we cannot base our decisions on that. We have to base it on some principles. And there I agree with you also, Pia, that let's just be clear on what those principles are then, and let's just be transparent about it. I think Anna also mentioned it. That's so key. I think that's so key. Just be transparent about the values, the fundamental principles you use, and then you can disagree or agree, but then at least you know where it comes from. I think also Snipper, the CEO of Ørsted here in Denmark, mentioned it. That part about maybe I think it was last year. He said, "Listen, I definitely don't have all the answers. I don't. So don't expect me to have them. I rely on you guys as well. So there's no one particular person to look towards, especially in crisis situations."
I love this vulnerability. It's not something I've heard leaders talk about very much at all. So I think from the other side then, we talked earlier about millennials coming into the workforce and already part of the workforce. What advice, or maybe advice is not the right word, but what can you share for them as well? Because they're not in your position yet, but hopefully there will be one day. What does, not just risk, but like, what could help their path?
I think actually the points that Anne made on being humble and curious were really well put, and I think it's I think one of the challenges, Anne works in the environment of social media. I think one of the worries I have if I look at the next generation is that some are extremely good at connecting and being aware of how can I actually help you, Pia, rather than focus on myself. But some actually, continue down the very narcissistic path. And without being too gloomy in my communication, I actually do believe that the ones who will lose out are the ones who actually, continue down the path of narcissism. Because you can't, if you want to be a leader in the future in all different kinds of companies, you need to be focused on the other. Be the customer, the consumer, the competitor, you know, the world, you know, the society. You need to be focused on something else than yourself. The world is larger, and some of them are natural on that, and some are not. And it's actually an interesting divide for me. Yeah. I'm very curious at how that will play out. Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Completely agree, and completely agree. And I'll add then also, and talked about engineering serendipity. So basically, the random events that happen. I think you could argue that I would argue that random events play a much bigger part in our life, and than many are probably willing to sort of say like or agree on. And so a lot of it is also about knowing when you're willing to take, so to say, the risk when the offer or the chance happens, and basically just survive until you get lucky, right? It's part of it. I believe that at least. So yeah.
The principle of luck.
The principle of luck. It's extremely powerful, and it's about being there when it happens.
Yeah.
And it plays such a big. And I think for many of us also when we look back, so many completely random events, are kind of like the cause for where we are today. That we had no idea. So a good exercise also for young people, and especially upcoming, is to say, where 5 years ago, where would I believe that I would be 5 years from now, and how close are you with that prediction? Chances are you'll be very far away from it. So.
Well, I'd love to go to some questions. I've got lots more questions, but there's lots of people sending in their questions, so I think we should give them a chance to ask as well. I'm going to go from the top. And in flat organisations, most of the voices are being included, and trust and transparency are essential. What would your recommendations be for organisations who are more hierarchical and where trust and transparency are lacking? Henriette, I can see you nodding. So
I think, to me, the advice would be, and I don't know where you're calling from, but it would be get with the program. Because I honestly, I think it's going to be very hard in the future to run a classical hierarchical organization. I think that, the organizations that will thrive the most are the ones who are outside in, who are focused on the consumers, the customers, and going back into the organization. So I think, of course, there has to be some kind of, formal hierarchy. But if you look at the conversation going on, it has to be, conversation and not orders from the top. I think that if you look at least if you look at Denmark and look at the companies who do well, you're from Lego, Jesper, Ørsted you mentioned before. If you look at the leadership style and the organization of those companies, if you go to the bottom of the decision-making process, it's not classical hierarchical, I would argue.
No, we're talking about millenniums. I think it's even further important to emphasize, because these constraints about the hierarchy is not even in their mindset. So that would really challenge that generation as well. They would be super challenged.
Probably wouldn't even go for the job.
No,
right?
probably not.
I mean, maybe just one comment on that. If you look at some of the sectors who have at least the employer brand of being more hierarchical, for example, the financial sector, you will see right now that the number of people who are looking for jobs in that sector is going down, right? So that's of course a sign that you want to work in an organization where you're involved in decision making, right? And where there's a purpose.
Yeah, purpose.
Lovely. I have a second question that's come in. I have a lot of questions actually. Don't be afraid, they're all nice. Do you think the new ways of working can be a force for good to break up toxic work cultures and lead to a new, more empathetic mode of leadership? I mean, we've touched on empathy a lot and the vulnerability and everything like that, but what would your answer be to that?
I would say yes, and I think our conversation has confirmed that. So that's. I mean, if we say we have this way of working before and now this, then I think the beauty of combining, or we will find, I think companies will find their own way in between. That is the new usual. Then, so then you take somehow, if you're smart, you take the good part of everything and then you combine it. So I think That must be the aim, and I trust that will happen, because no one wants to go back to bad things. So that's what we learn. I mean, when you have learned something great and you know a new skill, or in this case, a new way of working, why would you go back? So I think it's I mean, everyone will just have this. We need to do something else. So that sometimes, so it will not be like black and white. It will be something gray, and the gray will be different from company to company, values to values. But of course, it will change. I mean, in a way where everyone feels that this is good.
It feels like a duh moment
Yeah.
in a way. It's
Yeah,
like, of course, I'm not going to go back.
That's actually, from a workplace perspective, I think that's extremely interesting, and also, of course, from a leadership perspective, because I think there is consensus that it's been such a great step that we're, that because you can get, bits and pieces, the good bits and pieces from, so to say, both worlds. More work-life balance, ideally for the individual, right? The company can actually also use its space better and make sure that the offices are there for that socialization. But why wasn't this so obvious 2 years ago? I mean, do we really need a crisis to? So why was nobody doing this? Because the value proposition, and I've been sitting with it, and I've presented it to our executive leadership team. It's so clear and obvious. So why didn't we do it? It was also clear and obvious 2 years ago, but we weren't forced to do it. So I think that's also coming back to what Ann was saying about sometimes it is that for me is a bit mind blowing, and also maybe still also explains a bit about the risk-taking of companies. There's some things are so ingrained in us still. Going to the office every day as a default mode. Nobody questioned that really. I mean, some did, but not to the extent where we actually made full company-blown changes based on it. So for me at least,
and
that's
taking habits
pretty
takes so
interesting.
long. So it's interesting that actually this pandemic has went so far, or has taken so long, that actually can change habits. Normally we go into a new mode and then easily go back because it was not long enough. But I hope and trust that this time actually it has created so much. The system has understood the new, so we don't go immediately back.
It's true.
I think it's so true, and I think just maybe I think philosophically in all executive teams you will have the executives who trust your employees, and you'll have the executives who don't trust the employees, right? So empathy is a little bit complicated there. I guess it's two ways of being empathic, right? One is give everybody freedom because we trust them. The other one is you can't trust them, so we need to take care of and do the calendar for people, right? But now we've actually proven that efficiency goes up or stays at a good level even if we work remotely, right? It's actually a minority of colleagues who find it hard to organize their own work in this working from home. So that actually just it's wonderful because the good guys win here, right? It's the proof is actually that we actually do our work even if we have to work from our living rooms or our bedrooms, right? Which we knew in global companies, we knew that before because we had actually had that experience, but we were uncertain about it, right? And I think it just shows we can do it now, right?
Proof is in the pudding,
Yeah.
And I'm impressed with how fast it happened, how fast we all adapted as well. I think that's a takeaway I took from the early days of it. Is just like, wow, okay, we're running with this. This is the way we go, and it worked. Some bits of it worked.
But isn't it that everything that is meaningful, you adapt immediately? And I think coming back, we have known this unconsciously, and it has been there, but we haven't dared formally to take some of these decisions that could make this happen. As you said, we knew it already, right? So I think if it's meaningful, then that's what we are drawn towards. When things are meaningful, then we do it because it makes sense.
It's really interesting because it touches on a question that I jotted down here for myself as well about what leaders are good. Anne talked about leaders being good at recognizing something in themselves at moments of pivot. And I think I'd like to ask same question of you. What experience do you have with that? And it sounds like we're touching on it there a little bit already, but is there anything else from your experience, those moments you've had to pivot? Just to put you all on the spot, of course, live on camera.
Yeah, I think you only know what you know when you need to know it, right? It's like it is the moment where you are most under pressure that you actually suddenly flourish, and we see that over and over again. So I think, and it goes for individuals, it goes for organizations, it goes for teams. I think the most important, one of the fun conversations I had when at the time I was in Lego for a short while, was actually discussing with the executive team, because everything had gone really well for a long time when I joined. So talking to them about why have things gone so well, which is of course the most rare analysis we ever do, right? Because we're so preoccupied with what goes wrong and why did it not work. So I'm just thinking about, Phil, now that you talk about pivoting moments, it's about acting, and then it's about finding out what it is that we do, because that's actually at least as important, right? Because then you can repeat it, right? But I'm actually more, the reason why I'm a little, I'm probably more collectively focused than Anne was in the talk, because I'm very focused on when does the collective pivot, the moment where a collective, being the board and the executive team, when they can suddenly talk about stuff in a different way. And that's not an individual process, and you can't it's a sort of a popcorn moment. It's suddenly the conversation shifts, and that's actually, from an organizational point of view, to me more important than the individual.
Interesting perspective.
Sense?
Yes, and it works on both levels. I can see that. Yeah.
And probably companies with strong values have a benefit here. I think, and here we represent some, but it might not be in all companies who has a good value set that is really part of. So you also have that in your toolbox. So when a crisis is there, okay, for instance, togetherness or whatever, as one of those we have. I mean, so I think we can also see differences in how companies has come to this.
Sure.
It's a very good point. You have mission, value, and purpose.
Yes, exactly.
All there, and everybody buys into them and believes in them. I guess that must help, especially when it comes to leaders, being able to kind of get everybody on the same path.
Plus, I think there's also deep wisdom, especially in failings. So, I mean, I would much rather read a book about someone's failures throughout life than someone's successes, because it's, a lot of that is also, when you look at it backwards, everything seems to be just maths, and that was like, so you explain it, so to say, afterwards. Yeah, of course that was, it couldn't happen otherwise. Of course I would have been, I would have been successful given this and that, but I think failures are much more generalizable, and what Anne is also saying in the speech about, or in an interview about Eric and Jeff. Yeah, again, what makes them great leaders? I mean, you can find thousands of others who have the exact same traits. So it's probably their, a lot of in their experiences and their failures and how and a lot of luck as
serendipity,
well, right?
yeah.
There's serendipity as well, and I think sometimes it's also about, we tend to, for good reasons, by the way, and maybe it's again back to the focus on the individual, the great leader. I think sometimes it's also about thinking, what you call via negativa. So what makes you not a bad leader? What is needed for you to not be a bad leader? Because we want to get rid of bad leaders. We want to have good leaders, and then it's okay, we have some great leaders. But I think maybe if we can just manage that, there'll be a huge step along the way of having a collective good leadership.
And that's actually why I think that your companies, when you are so value-based, why you do significantly better, because you seem to be better at weaving out the individuals who are so self-centered that the only thing that matters is my own results, and then you just ruin stuff around you. So I think and I think that's actually the best thing about very, very value-driven organizations, that you seem to be better at weaving out those individuals so that the collective of leaders become better, right? It's very impressive. Because
I think it's so true, and actually what we're also seeing, at least at Lego, at least that would be my observation, that like Henriette, I've also worked with some of the senior leaders at Lego, and they seem to be more, so to say, influenced by the culture and the values than vice versa. Even though they're very strong leaders with great characteristics and all that. Which is interesting. I think some companies very much become one individual,
Which could be toxic, can it not? Sorry, Henriette.
Yeah, and maybe just one on that note, one interesting fact. In 19, I believe, and maybe also 20, was the first year that the number of CEOs who have left their job due to value clash or some kind of, outrageous behavior, so to speak, was higher than, other reasons. So it's just to say, it seems as if the whole community around boards and executive teams and headhunters and professional advisors are sort of, increasing the expectations on the values and the behaviors and the sort of the link between what you say and what you do in the executive suite, which I think again is great. Yeah. It's about time. Yeah.
Agreed.
That's super. Okay, we're going to take another question. I have experienced that a flat organization can lack focus and vision, jeopardizing the strategy as more voices and opinions are shared. How can this be avoided? Jesper, maybe because you were giving your keynote on the workspace and the workplace earlier, what do you say to that?
Well, yeah, to be honest, it's I don't know. I mean, Pia, you had this great. You talked about earlier about giving direction, and then after giving direction, give goals, and then leave the room, right? Yeah. So I think there's something in there for that. I mean, I think it's important to say that if all opinions matter, and we should look for all opinions, but there's still some inputs in the end that are better than others, and we should strive to take them in and build from that, right? So it's not about so I think it's important to be open towards input, getting everybody's input in. That's also the flat organization. That's also what the office hours. Let's get everybody in to make sure that because it's such a the complex world, of course, with so many feedback loops, and it's impossible for one person to figure it all out. So let's get the inputs in, but also let's make sure that we filter out and are clear about that and build from that. So I think there's a lot of communication in that, and there's of course also leadership in making sure that process happens. So I think so it actually requires leadership to be bold, also to say, but some ideas we're going to build from. Some directions are better than others, but we've listened to everybody. So but I don't know if you.
I can recognize what is being asked about here, that there is of course more mess, you could argue, in flat organizations. But it's important to say that just because you don't hear the different voices, it's not the same as saying as they're not there. So I would argue in a very hierarchical organization, you've got so much mess going on, people wasting life because they're discussing what the executive team have decided, right? So I would argue the open conversation in an organization needs to be taken anyway, right? But of course you hear it more in a flat organization. You could argue the most efficient organization is the organization where the shared story about why we're here, who are we here for, why are we here, what the hell are we doing, and why are we better than anybody else. The organizations that share that story the most, they're the organizations that are most resonant, right? And where there's less, you could say, inefficiency. But in order for that to happen, you need to discuss stuff, right? You can't agree before you disagree.
I'm interested in the process of when you've collected in these opinions from a flat structure, what goes, like leaders like yourself, what goes through your mind and how to make a decision on all those probably varying viewpoints? Is there certain approaches or tools you take to that, or?
Again, if the vision is clear and you have some goals, I mean, very simple things. Yeah. Then you benchmark towards that. I mean, so that gives you, that could be a very traditional way, but it's you have, I mean,
completely agree, Pia. I think that's where strategy comes into play. Yeah. Basically, strategy is, at least for me, it's a tool for decision making. It's something we refer back to whenever a decision is being made, right? As a very low-key example from so one of the responsibilities I have in my team is designing offices and all that, right? So if we one of our ambitions as a team we have fun and playful as an ambition when we do offices, then every time you were to choose between, let's say, two different kinds of curtains, you would pick the fun and colorful one, never the gray or the white or whatever. So it's a tool for decision making, right? So something to relate back to. So I think that's where strategy comes into play, and that's also where the transparency then becomes clear, because the strategy is something that that you ideally also have built together in some way at least, right? So.
Thank you. Well, we're closing up time. I'm going to try and squeeze a couple of questions in just before we go. Does the panel, yourselves, reckon that leaders will work to keep the positives of the work from home model as the return to office is implemented? But it says positives here that everyone in the online meetings could participate and be heard in open discussions, reducing the hierarchical feel. So we're going to keep the positives of the work from home model. What do you think?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Seems to introduce some of that work-life balance a little bit more.
It's great to be able to sleep 8 hours every night and swim
Exactly.
in the ocean every morning and never fly with planes. I mean, it's great, right? And I hear just last week I was talking to 2 different board members saying they've never been more fit in their life, right?
Yeah.
Because they've actually been able to sleep and work out more than they've done before. Of course, we'll need to hold on to it. I think one of the challenges is that in the executive teams over the next couple of months, there will be this discussion. How will we come back? And I'm a little bit worried that that there will be this anxiety around, is this chaotic? Can we actually control it? And there will be this leap back to controlling in the old way. And I was like, there was no control in the old way. Just because you sit at your desk 8 hours is not, the same as saying that you're productive. Just like you said, Jesper, it's input measurement. It's not output measurement. So I really hope that we will hold on to the good stuff. But let's see.
Completely agree. I think we're at least at Lego, we're at least one of the things that I'm sure we'll keep is the online part, where people will try to be, if it's a 4-team meeting or four-person meeting, and one is online. I think the 3 others will also try to come online, because we now know the big difference between, and the power difference between being the only one online and the rest sitting together. Until we get some good technology, I think the minority rules applies there, where the others will adapt to that person being online. So I hope we'll at some point. I know some technology has been being built as we speak, but where you can actually have people together. Because of course it would be nice if you're 3 persons in the office. It would be nice, because I guess most of us would rather be physically in the same room than actually online.
So it requires some new rules.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you call it? Yeah, play rules or
Guidelines or whatever.
Guidelines for how to work, because otherwise it becomes imbalanced suddenly if you don't do that. So that's the new thing on the table.
I was going to say, that's the thing we have to develop now, isn't it? And kind of co-create.
It's probably not called rules either, but it's some sticks, so some frames for this to make it work for everyone.
Or some sub-values.
Yes, we
need
new ways of working or something.
Yeah. This has to be in place, otherwise it's not working. Otherwise it would be super.
Which is quite pertinent for the title of this this whole universe as well, designing the new usual. In that sense, we've got to find what this new usual is. I'm going to wrap up there with our questions. Thank you very much, and thank you also to you for being able to send in so many questions. We couldn't get to them all, of course, because there's a lot to get through, but we will try and tackle as many of them as possible afterwards as well, and get the answers to you out there somehow. So please watch this space. Okay. So there's always someone putting a stop to the party, and it's normally me. So it's time to wrap up. Pia, Henriette, Jesper, thank you so much, and thanks to Ann also for being part of today. I really appreciate you joining us and helping us kind of unpack all this and trying to work out what it is. The topic of leadership, particularly in current times, I think some of the things that have stuck with me, little things I've been noting around on my paper as I go, this idea of it being more about relationships, not so much individuals, or finding the the sweet spot there, if you like, as well. What is needed not to be a bad leader really resonated with me as well, Jesper, as did this idea of vulnerability. It's not something I've heard talked about openly as well. I'm not sure if anybody else has, but I think it really touched the empathic heart of what I would like to look for from a leader as well. So thank you, all of you. And thanks also to you for tuning in, all of you out there. I really appreciate it. Frankly, it's not possible without you anyway, so thank you. We'll continue discussing everything we've covered today and more on all our social media channels. We'll also follow up with clips and summer particles and an online talk on Clubhouse to see how these things have all manifested as well. All the details are online. You can find your way that way. The next event is going to be in August, looking at sustainability. There's a lot to unpack there as well. That's a rather large word just to plonk on the table. Please book it in your calendars now. It'll be so nice to see you. From myself and all of us at the Index Project and Design It, see you next time.